Mist clings to the slopes of the Murchison Mountains, a remote area of southwestern New Zealand. Rain drifts through alpine grasslands, and the wind moves slowly through the tussock. In places like this, human civilization is a distant memory. The grasslands appear empty, but they are not silent. Rushing water, rustling grasses, chirping insects, and distant birdsong make a mosaic of sound, a landscape untouched by human hands. Almost. In 1948, a small expedition moved through this landscape, searching for something that, according to science, no longer existed: the takahē. For decades, the bird had been considered extinct. Museums held only a few preserved skins and bones. No confirmed sightings had been recorded for exactly 50 years. Most zoologists assumed that whatever remained of the species had vanished long ago, but the search continued. Then, moving quietly through the grass, one of the explorers saw something ahead: a large bird stepping out from the cover of the tussock. Its plumage was deep blue and green, its bill heavy and red. It walked slowly across the slope, unconcerned, and completely unaware that humans believed it no longer existed. It was unmistakable. It was a takahē. This account is not an outlier, but one of a pattern. Animals and plants humans once believed extinct being found again, sometimes in other locations, sometimes hidden in caves, dense forests, or remote mountains. But in any case, alive, when they were once believed gone forever. The coelacanth, Lord Howe's stick insect, and even just earlier this year, in 2026, 2 species of possums. These, along with many others, have been rediscovered after science had long since assumed them lost, which raises uncomfortable questions. When we say a species is extinct, what do we really mean? How long must an animal go unseen before we conclude it is gone? And how certain can we ever be that somewhere in a remote corner of the world, the last survivors are not still holding on? Let's start with the most basic question. What does it actually mean for a species to be extinct? Today, extinction is one of the most fundamental concepts in biology. Entire branches of science, paleontology, conservation biology, even evolutionary theory, depend on it. We speak easily of vanished species, from trilobites to mammoths, as though the disappearance of life were an obvious and inevitable fact. But for most of human history, the idea that a species could truly vanish from the earth seemed almost impossible. More than 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle proposed a version of nature that would influence scientific thinking for centuries. In this view, life formed a continuous hierarchy, a graded ladder running from the simplest organisms to the most complex. Later scholars would call this hierarchy the scala naturae, the ladder of nature. Every form of life had its place within this order. Nothing was missing, and nothing was redundant. Over time, this idea evolved into the concept later known as the Great Chain of Being, a vast, interconnected system in which all possible forms of life existed somewhere in the world. If a creature seemed to disappear, the most reasonable explanation was simply that it had not yet been found. The earth is vast, and human knowledge of it was limited. For centuries, this assumption shaped how naturalists interpreted the natural world. And yet, even in the classical era, there were hints that nature might not be as permanent as philosophers imagined. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, from the 1st century of the Common Era, recorded the disappearance of a remarkable plant known as silphium, once harvested across North Africa for food and medicine. According to Pliny, the plant had become so rare that a single surviving stalk was presented to the Emperor Nero. This story is often cited as the earliest account of extinction, although the Romans did not think of it in that way. For them, it was simply a useful resource that was becoming harder to harvest. Whether the story is entirely accurate is uncertain, but it hints at a possibility that ancient philosophy struggled to accommodate, that human activity might drive a species to disappearance. So, extinction was not a concept grasped by the ancient Roman or Greek worlds. But then fossils began to complicate the picture. Across Europe and Asia, quarry workers and collectors were uncovering strange bones embedded in rock. Some resembled the skeletons of elephants or crocodiles. Others belonged to animals unlike anything alive today. To many naturalists, the explanation seemed obvious. these creatures must still exist somewhere in unexplored regions of the world. One of the most famous examples involved enormous elephant-like bones discovered across Siberia. These remains clearly belong to animals far larger than any elephant living today. Yet, elephants did not inhabit the frozen north. For centuries, scholars debated their origin. Some argued the bones had been carried north by ancient floods. Others suggested that living populations of these Arctic elephants might still exist somewhere in the vast and unexplored interior of Asia. But at the turn of the 19th century, the French naturalist Georges Cuvier began carefully comparing fossil bones with the skeletons of living animals. When he examined the teeth and skulls of these Siberian fossils, he noticed consistent differences from elephants. These animals were not simply elephants transported to the Arctic. They represented a distinct species, the woolly mammoth. And if mammoths were truly different from living elephants, and no living populations could be found, then only one explanation remained. They were gone. Entire species, Cuvier argued, that had once lived on Earth had disappeared completely. It was a radical idea. If he was correct, then nature was not a perfectly stable system. Life had a history, one that included both the appearance and disappearance of entire forms of life. Extinction, in other words, was real. But recognizing extinction created a new question. If species could disappear, how could scientists ever be certain that one truly had? Proving a species exists is relatively simple. A single observation is enough. One photograph, one specimen, one living individual. Any of these confirms that a species survives. Proving the opposite is far more difficult. To demonstrate extinction would require showing that no individuals remain anywhere on Earth, not in forests, caves, deserts, mountains, or the depths of the ocean. It would require proving a negative across an entire planet. In practice, this is impossible. Logically, this creates a problem. Concluding that a species is extinct simply because no one has seen it risks falling into what philosophers call the argument from ignorance, assuming something must be false because it has not been proven true. Instead, scientists approach extinction as a question of probability. Every species has a certain likelihood of being detected if it is present. A large bird calling across open grassland is difficult to overlook, so it will have a high likelihood of detection. A small, nocturnal insect living deep in a rainforest may go unnoticed for decades. It has a much lower likelihood of detection. Even when a species survives, surveys may fail to find it simply by chance. This concept, known as detection probability, means that the absence of sightings does not necessarily mean the absence of the species itself. Because of this uncertainty, scientists have sometimes relied on simple rules of thumb. One widely cited guideline suggested that if a species has not been recorded for 50 years, it was reasonable to assume it had disappeared. At first glance, this rule seems sensible. A species that has gone unseen for half a century must surely be gone. And yet, the rediscovery of the takahē occurred almost exactly 50 years after its last confirmed sighting, and other rediscoveries have taken longer. Today, organisations such as the International Union for Conservation of Nature or the IUCN avoid fixed time limits. Instead, they define extinction more cautiously. They now consider a species extinct only when there is no reasonable doubt that the last individual has died. Reaching that conclusion requires extensive surveys across the species' known and expected ranges, conducted over many years. Even then, uncertainty remains. This uncertainty is often why rumours so often persist after a species is believed to be extinct. Sightings of the thylacine in Australia continue to surface decades after the last confirmed individual died in captivity. Similar stories are reported for the moa of New Zealand, the Javan tiger of Indonesia, the ivory-billed woodpecker of the United States. Most of these reports are almost certainly mistaken, but not always. Scientists recognise two closely related concepts for the rediscovery of species once believed extinct: Lazarus Taxa and Romeo eras, both named after characters from well-known stories. The term Lazarus taxon refers to the biblical figure Lazarus of Bethany, who, according to the Gospel of John, was raised from the dead. In biology, however, the resurrection is only apparent. A Lazarus taxon is a species that vanished from the scientific record for an extended period before being found again. The concept first emerged in paleontology. In the fossil record, Entire lineages sometimes disappear from the geological layers for millions of years, only to reappear in younger deposits. The organisms themselves did not truly vanish and return. It only appears that way. Instead, their intervening fossils simply were not preserved or have not yet been discovered. This pattern revealed an important truth about extinction. The absence of evidence does not necessarily mean the absence of a species. In fact, the vast majority of extinct species are thought to have left no trace at all. Some researchers estimate that around 99% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct, and that well over 99.9% of these are not represented in the fossil record. The same principle also applies to living organisms. Occasionally, species believed to be extinct are rediscovered decades or even centuries later, alive but overlooked. When this happens, they too are often described as Lazarus taxa. Lazarus taxon is the term used for the pattern, a species believed lost but later rediscovered. But from the perspective of conservation science, the event also represents something else, a mistake. Declaring a species extinct is a serious conclusion. It signals that conservation efforts may no longer be possible, and that a branch of life's history has come to an end. When that conclusion is reached too soon, scientists refer to the mistake by a rather poetic name, a Romeo error. Like Lazarus taxon, the name references a literary character. In the tragedy Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, Romeo believes Juliet has died and takes his own life beside her. Only moments later does Juliet awaken. His fatal decision was based on a mistaken assumption. In conservation biology, a Romeo error occurs when a species is assumed to be extinct even though individuals still survive somewhere in the wild. Famous examples of Lazarus taxa and Romeo errors include the deep-sea fish known as the coelacanth, once thought to have disappeared with the dinosaurs, until it was found for sale in a local fish market, the flightless takahē we met at the start of the video, and the remarkable Lord Howe stick insect, rediscovered, clinging to survival on a single volcanic sea stack in the Pacific. None of these species truly returned from extinction. They had been present all along, hidden by remoteness, rarity, or simple chance. And yet, their rediscovery serves as a reminder that the boundary between extinction and survival is often far less clear than it appears. If species thought to be extinct sometimes survive, a natural question follows. Why do these rediscoveries happen at all? In most cases, the explanation is not mysterious. Species do not return from the dead, and extinction itself is rarely reversed. Instead, rediscoveries occur because the surviving populations remained beyond the reach of scientific observation. Although each case has its own circumstances, most rediscoveries fall into three broad patterns. The first involves remoteness. Some species survive simply because they inhabit places that humans rarely visit. Mountain ranges, isolated islands, deep forests, and the depths of the ocean remain surprisingly difficult to survey thoroughly. In such environments, small populations can persist undetected for decades. The rediscovery of the takahē in the mountains of New Zealand is a clear example. For 50 years the bird was believed extinct, yet a small population had continued to survive in remote alpine valleys that few people ever entered. A second pattern involves species that are present but difficult to detect. In 2025, the Blyde Rodaval Flat gecko of South Africa was discovered in the same region where it had last been recorded in 1991. As a small, well-camouflaged lizard that climbs cliffs using its adhesive toe pads, the species is extremely difficult to find. It had been presumed extinct after decades without confirmed sightings, but as we now know, it continues to survive in its specialized habitat. A third pattern occurs when species are encountered but are not recognized for what they are. In some cases, individuals have been seen or even collected before their significance was understood. The most famous example is the coelacanth. For decades, fishermen had occasionally caught the unusual fish in deep waters of the Indian Ocean, but it was only when one specimen reached the attention of museum scientists that its true identity became clear, a representative of a lineage previously known only from fossils. Together, these patterns reveal that rediscoveries are rarely mysterious. They are usually the result of limited knowledge, unexplored landscapes, elusive species, or simple misidentification. And when those gaps in knowledge are finally closed, species thought lost can suddenly reappear. We have already looked at two of the most famous rediscoveries, the takahē and the coelacanth. But this phenomenon is far more common than most people realize. Species thought long gone continue to turn up in surprising places, often in small numbers or in habitats humans rarely visit. One striking example is the Lord Howe Island stick insect. After rats reached Lord Howe Island in the early 20th century, the species was presumed extinct. Yet, decades later, a tiny population was discovered clinging to vegetation on Ball's Pyramid, a steep volcanic sea stack rising from the Pacific Ocean over 20 kilometers from Lord Howe Island. Its survival owed entirely to the inaccessibility of its remote home. Rediscoveries are not limited to famous cases. Many occur quietly, far from headlines. In 1992, a group of researchers exploring limestone forests in Vietnam encountered an unusual rodent being sold as food in a local market. At first glance, it seemed unfamiliar. When scientists examined the animal more closely, they realized they were looking at something extraordinary, a member of a lineage previously known only from fossils. The species, now known as the Laotian rock rat, represents a family of rodents thought to have vanished from the fossil record more than 10 million years ago. Its rediscovery revealed that an entire evolutionary lineage had survived unnoticed in the forests of Southeast Asia. A more recent rediscovery was in 2019. Researchers surveying the forests of Papua New Guinea captured the first photographs of Attenborough's long-beaked echidna. The species had not been scientifically documented since the 1960s and was widely feared to be extinct. Yet camera traps eventually confirmed that it still persisted in remote forest mountains. Even more recently, the forest of New Guinea yielded yet another surprise. In March of 2026, two marsupials, previously known only from ancient remains, were confirmed to be alive: the pygmy long-fingered possum and the ring-tailed glider. Both species were presumed extinct for thousands of years, yet small populations continue to survive in the remote Vogelkop Peninsula. For some non-mammalian examples, we can turn to the New Zealand storm petrel, a seabird once thought extinct for more than 150 years. In 2003, it was confirmed to be alive through DNA analysis that matched living birds to centuries-old museum specimens. Even so, its surviving breeding colony was not discovered for another decade, when a nesting site was discovered on Little Barrier Island in 2013. Stories like these reveal another point. A species believed extinct by science is not always unknown to the people who live alongside it. The coelacanth had been occasionally caught by fishermen in the Western Indian Ocean, long before scientists recognized its significance. To local communities, it was simply another unusual fish from the deep, and one that was not good to eat. Only when one specimen reached a museum did its identity become clear. A similar story surrounds the enigmatic sail-backed hound shark. After its scientific discovery in 1973, this shark disappeared, bringing its validity as a species into question. These doubts were put to rest in 2020, when they were discovered to have a limited range around the mouth of the Gogol River in Papua New Guinea. However, even during this scientific absence, the shark was still reported by local fishermen. These examples highlight an important limitation of rediscovery stories. What appears to be a miraculous return from extinction may sometimes reflect something simpler: the moment when scientific knowledge finally intersects with local or indigenous knowledge. But rediscoveries can also go wrong. Occasionally, a species believed to have been rediscovered later turns out to be something else entirely. Misidentifications, rumours, and hopeful interpretations can easily spread when a species is famous for having vanished. One of the most persistent examples comes not from biology, but from cryptozoology, the search for creatures whose existence is based on anecdote and legend rather than confirmed evidence. The legendary creature known as Mokele Mbembe from the Congo Basin is a case in point. For decades, explorers, cryptozoologists, and amateur enthusiasts have claimed that a long-necked, dinosaur-like animal survives in remote rivers and swamps. Despite numerous expeditions and sensational stories, no physical evidence, no bones, DNA, or unambiguous photographs has ever been produced to confirm that such a creature exists. Most scientists believe the reports likely stem from misidentification of known animals, such as hippos or elephants, or from folklore and cultural storytelling, rather than a real, undiscovered species. Similarly, the idea of surviving dinosaurs lurking in remote regions has inspired other supposed rediscoveries that never held up under scrutiny. Reports of creatures like Kasai rex, a supposed dinosaur-like animal said to have attacked a rhinoceros in the Belgian Congo in the 1930s, are now generally regarded as misinterpretations or hoaxes, often based on single unverified accounts with no follow-up evidence. That does not mean all unusual animal reports should be dismissed outright. In some cases, searching for mysterious creatures has led to the discovery of real species previously unknown to science. In 1992, biologists working in the forests of Vietnam encountered unusual horns in local villages belonging to an animal they had never seen before. The species was eventually described as the saola, a large forest-dwelling relative of cattle that had long gone completely unrecognized by Western science. In other cases, discoveries happen purely by accident. In 1976, a large and unfamiliar shark became entangled in the anchor of a United States Navy research vessel near Hawaii. When scientists examined the specimen, they realized it belonged to a species no one had ever documented before, the megamouth shark, one of the rarest and least understood sharks in the ocean. Discoveries like these show that unusual reports are not always imaginary. Sometimes they simply reflect gaps in scientific knowledge. Even animals that really did exist can generate false hopes. The thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, is a well-documented species that went extinct in the wild in the 20th century. Despite the last confirmed individual dying in captivity in 1938, research suggests that some thylacines may have survived in remote areas into the 1980s or 1990s. Today, they are almost certainly gone. Nevertheless, hundreds of unconfirmed sightings and occasional blurry photographs have circulated for decades, all failing to provide verifiable evidence of survival. Similarly, claims that the giant flightless moa of New Zealand still roam hidden valleys have persisted, fueled by misidentified footprints or echoes of folklore rather than confirmed field data. In the modern age, every phone camera and trail cam can become a potential source of evidence. From blurry footage of pterosaur-like creatures in flight to frogs in forest streams, thousands of clips circulate online claiming to show species thought to be lost. In nearly every case that scientists have evaluated, the animals turn out to be known species or indeterminate images. Technology has made it easier than ever to capture images, but it has also made it easier for unverified claims to spread faster than science can confirm them. These false leads serve an important reminder. Rediscovery requires rigorous evidence, not just hopeful sightings. Declaring a species rediscovered without firm verification can mislead the public, divert scientific resources, and perpetuate myths rather than expanding knowledge. Rediscoveries are often framed as miracles, species returning from the dead after decades, centuries, or even longer. But in reality, they reveal something far more interesting: the limits of our knowledge. Extinction is rarely something we observe directly. Most species simply disappear from our records. A forest goes unsurveyed. A mountain valley is rarely visited. A deep-sea fish is caught only occasionally. When sightings stop, we are left to make the best judgment we can with incomplete information. Sometimes that judgment is correct. Many species declared extinct are truly gone. But sometimes a small population survives, just beyond the reach of observation, hidden by distance, rarity, or simple chance. When those populations are finally found again, they remind us that the boundary between extinction and survival is often far less clear than it appears. In recent years, a new idea has entered the discussion: de-extinction. Advances in genetics have led some researchers to explore whether it might be possible to recreate aspects of extinct species by modifying the DNA of living relatives. These projects are sometimes presented as bringing animals back from extinction, but even if such efforts succeed, they would not represent the rediscovery of a lost species. At best, they would create a modern organism that resembles one that once lived. Rediscovery, by contrast, reveals something far rarer, a lineage that never vanished in the first place, surviving quietly beyond the edge of our knowledge. Rediscoveries, therefore, tell us two things at once. They show that extinction is real and often irreversible, but they also reveal that the natural world still holds surprises, and that even in the 21st century, our knowledge of life on Earth remains incomplete. I hope you enjoyed this journey into extinction and rediscovery. If you're interested in the research behind this episode, you can find a document with image credits and sources in the description below. These videos take a great deal of time and research to produce. They will always remain free to watch. But if you would like to support the channel and gain access to new videos a little earlier, you can find a link to my Patreon below as well. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.